It was a sound Richard Sterling hadn't heard in his house for 3 years. Laughter, splashing, life. It was coming from the pool, but that was impossible. Matthew couldn't move, Matthew couldn't swim, and Matthew definitely couldn't laugh. Richard froze in the hallway on the second floor of his Bel Air mansion. It was 5:45 in the morning. Dawn hadn't even fully broken yet. The golden light was just starting to seep through the windows when that sound stopped him dead in his tracks. Water, laughter, impossible. If you think a sound can change a life, you don't know this story. Because Richard Sterling was a man who had everything, except the one thing that mattered. He was the CEO of Sterling Pharmaceuticals, a company valued at $300 million, 52 years old, $15,000 suits, Swiss watches, a 4-story house with an Olympic-sized pool he never used. He worked 14 hours a day, 7 days a week. Why did he work so much? Because that way he didn't have to think. That way he didn't have to remember. That way he didn't have to look into Matthew's eyes and see what his gift had caused. Matthew Sterling, 19 years old, tetraplegic, his nephew. 3 years ago, Matthew was different. He was a rising star in motorcycle racing, outgoing, smiling, full of life. He was winning junior races. He had a girlfriend. He dreamed of going pro. And Richard, his uncle, the successful man, gave him the bike of his dreams for his 16th birthday, a metallic blue Yamaha R6, $120,000, the best. 4 months later, Matthew crashed on the 405 freeway, C5, C6, spinal cord injury, incomplete tetraplegia. His sister, Matthew's mom, died in the same accident. She was riding with him. Richard never forgave himself. He bought that bike, he signed for the gift, he killed his sister and destroyed Matthew. That's what he thought every night before falling asleep. So he worked, and worked, and worked. Matthew had lived at Richard's house since the accident. He had a room on the ground floor, adapted with bars and medical equipment. Nurses came 3 times a day, physical therapists twice a week. The best neurologists in Los Angeles evaluated him every month. Richard paid for everything, $150,000 a month in medical care, but he never spent time with him. He couldn't. Every time he saw Matthew in that wheelchair, he saw his own guilt, so he paid others to take care of what he had broken. And Matthew didn't talk much, he didn't smile, he didn't show emotion. The doctors said it was post-traumatic depression, normal in cases of severe spinal cord injury. They prescribed antidepressants. Matthew took them. Nothing changed. 3 years without a smile, 3 years without hearing him laugh, 3 years of silence. But that morning, at 5:45, Richard heard something impossible, laughter. He walked slowly toward the hallway window that overlooked the pool. His heart was beating fast. He was afraid to look. He was afraid it was his imagination. He was afraid it was real. He peeked out, and what he saw took his breath away. In the pool, under the golden light of dawn, was Matthew, floating in the water with yellow flotation devices on his arms and torso. And next to him, holding him carefully, was Evelyn, the housekeeper, her soaked blue uniform clinging to her body and her yellow rubber gloves still on. She was singing something softly, and Matthew was smiling. Richard felt his legs tremble. He reached out to the window for support. He didn't understand. He couldn't understand. Matthew couldn't be in the water. Matthew couldn't float. Matthew couldn't smile. But there he was, smiling. Richard didn't go downstairs. He didn't interrupt. He just watched. For 10 full minutes, motionless, he watched as Evelyn gently moved Matthew through the water. He saw her talking to him. He saw Matthew close his eyes, relaxed, with an expression of peace that Richard hadn't seen since before the accident. When Evelyn finally got Matthew out of the water, using a portable lift that Richard didn't know existed, when she dried him with thick towels, when she dressed him in a robe and took him back to his room, Richard was still at that window, paralyzed, confused, and something else, moved. He went to work that morning without saying anything. But throughout the board meeting, during all the calls with investors, during all the presentations of new drugs, Richard could only think about one thing. Matthew smiled. That night, when he got home at 11 as usual, he stopped by Matthew's room. The door was ajar. Matthew was asleep. Richard entered silently. He approached, and then he saw it. On the back of the wheelchair, hanging carefully, was Matthew's robe, light blue, and it was damp. Still damp. At 11 o'clock at night, impossible. Matthew had his bath at 9 in the morning with the nurses. Why would his robe be wet at this hour? Richard touched it. The cold droplets dampened his fingers. It was real. He left the room. He went to the service room where Evelyn slept. He knocked on the door. There was no answer. He knocked again. Nothing. He opened it slowly. Evelyn wasn't there. The bed was perfectly made, as if she hadn't slept there. Richard frowned. It was 11:15 at night. Where was the housekeeper? He checked the whole house, the kitchen, the living room, the garden. Nothing. Then, almost instinctively, he went to the pool. And there, sitting in one of the lawn chairs by the water, was Evelyn, with a notebook in her hands, writing something under the light of a garden lamp. Richard approached silently. Evelyn didn't see him. She was focused. She was writing in small, tight handwriting. Richard managed to read from a distance. Day 200. Matthew moved his right index finger 2 millimeters. Slow but steady progress. Day 200. Of what? Richard cleared his throat. Evelyn jumped in fright. She closed the notebook immediately and stood up. Mr. Sterling, I apologize. I was just getting some air. Richard looked at her. Evelyn was 42 years old. She had been working at his house for 7 months. Quiet, efficient, never caused problems. She arrived early. She left late. She did her job without saying much. Richard had barely spoken to her in those 7 months beyond basic instructions. But now, looking at her under that dim light, he noticed something. Evelyn's hair was still a little damp, and she smelled of chlorine. Were you in the pool today? Richard asked. Evelyn lowered her gaze. She swallowed. Yes, sir. I apologize. I know I should have asked permission. I just wanted to help Matthew. The doctors say that water is good for mobility. I thought that if he tried, maybe he could feel better. Richard didn't respond immediately. He just looked at her, and then, for the first time in 3 years, Richard Sterling did something he hadn't done with anyone in his household. He asked, really asked, "How long have you been doing this, Evelyn?" Evelyn hesitated. Then in a low voice, she replied, 7 months, Mr. Sterling, ever since I started working here. Richard felt something strange in his chest, like something was breaking and fitting into place, all at the same time. 7 months? Every day? Every day, sir. From 5:30 to 7 in the morning, before you wake up. Why? Evelyn looked him directly in the eyes, and Richard saw something there. Something he hadn't seen in a long time. Determination, purpose, love. Because Matthew deserves to smile, and because I know what it's like to lose someone and not have done everything possible to save them. Richard didn't know what to say. He just stood there, holding the gaze of a woman he'd ignored for 7 months. A woman who, he now understood, knew Matthew better than he did. A woman who had dedicated 200 days to doing what he, with all his money, hadn't been able to do. Bring a smile back to Matthew's face. If you ever thought love only comes from family, this story is about to show you how wrong you are. Evelyn apologized again and went to her room. Richard was left alone by the pool, with the notebook that Evelyn had forgotten on the chair. He opened it. 200 pages, handwritten in tight, neat script. Each page was a day. Each day had schedules, exercises, observations, progress. Day 1. Matthew panicked when he touched the water. He cried. I took him out after 5 minutes. I'll try again tomorrow. Day 15, Matthew stopped crying. He just trembles. He lasted 10 minutes. Day 30, Matthew moved his right arm 3 centimeters when I asked him to try and reach the floating ball. Day 60, Matthew asked me why I was doing this. I told him, because I believe in you. He was quiet, but he didn't cry. Day 100, Matthew smiled for the first time. It was only a second, but I saw it. The day 150, Matthew said thank you. It's the first word he said to me in 2 months. Day 200, Matthew moved his right index finger 2 millimeters. Slow but steady progress. Richard read every page, every word, every observation, and with every line, he felt something he hadn't felt in 3 years. Hope and shame, because this woman, this housekeeper who earned $2,000 a month, had done in 7 months what he, with $50,000 a month in doctors, hadn't been able to do in 3 years. She had given Matthew back his life. Richard closed the notebook. He looked at the pool, and for the first time in a long time, he cried. The next morning, Richard did something he never did. He cancelled all his meetings. He told his assistant not to bother him, and at 5:20 in the morning, he got up, he got dressed, and he went to the hallway on the 2nd floor. At 5:32, he saw Evelyn come out of her room. She was wearing her blue uniform, her yellow gloves, and a bag with towels. She went straight to Matthew's room. Richard watched from a distance. Evelyn woke Matthew gently. She spoke to him in a low voice. Matthew nodded. Evelyn helped him get changed. She put on an adapted swimsuit, placed him in the wheelchair, and together they went towards the pool. Richard followed them, without being seen, like a ghost in his own house. When they got to the pool, Evelyn prepared everything with almost medical precision. She placed the yellow floats on Matthew's arms, adjusted the harness on his torso, turned on the portable lift, lowered Matthew slowly, very slowly, until he touched the water. Matthew trembled at first, but Evelyn spoke to him. Richard couldn't hear what she was saying. He only saw her lips moving. And little by little, Matthew relaxed. Evelyn got into the water, uniform and all, with her gloves on, and she began to move Matthew gently, rhythmically, like a dance. She spoke to him constantly. She was singing something. Richard got a little closer. It was a lullaby, something about stars and dreams. And then Richard saw it again. Matthew smiled. That smile, that damn smile that Richard hadn't seen in 3 years. There it was, on his nephew's face, caused by a woman who didn't have a medical degree, who didn't have money, who only had 2 things, time and love. Richard sat down in one of the lounge chairs, and he watched for a full hour. He saw how Evelyn worked with Matthew. He saw how she motivated him. He saw how she celebrated every millimeter of movement. He saw how, at the end, when she took Matthew out of the water, she dried him carefully, dressed him, and said something that made Matthew close his eyes and nod. When Evelyn turned the chair to take him back, she finally saw Richard. She stopped. She paled. "Mr. Sterling, I thought you'd already left for work." Richard stood up. He walked towards her. Evelyn took a step back. She was scared. She probably thought he was going to fire her, that he was going to scold her, that he was going to accuse her of something. But Richard didn't do any of that. He knelt down in front of Matthew, and he looked him in the eyes. Matthew looked back. Surprised, Richard never did this. He never got down to his level. He always spoke from above. "Matthew," Richard said, his voice breaking, "does this make you happy?" Matthew blinked. Then slowly, he nodded. "Yes, Uncle." Richard swallowed. "Then we're going to keep doing it. Every day. And I'm going to be here, if you'll let me." Matthew didn't say anything, but his eyes filled with tears. And Richard cried too, in front of Evelyn, in front of Matthew, in front of the pool he had never used. He cried for 3 years of absence, for 3 years of guilt, for 3 years of not having seen what was right in front of him. Evelyn didn't say anything. She just put a hand on Richard's shoulder, softly, and that was enough. If this story is touching your heart right now, if you feel something moving inside you, it's because you know it's true, because we all know someone like Evelyn, or we should be someone like Evelyn. That morning, Richard didn't go to work. He called his assistant and told her to cancel everything. Everything. For the first time in 15 years, Richard Sterling missed work, and he stayed home with Matthew. They had breakfast together. For the first time in 3 years, Richard asked Matthew things he had never asked him. How do you sleep? What do you dream about? What hurts? What makes you happy? Matthew at first didn't know how to respond. He wasn't used to his uncle talking to him, but little by little, he started to open up. He talked about the water, about how it made him feel free, about how Evelyn told him that his body could do more than the doctors thought, about how, for the first time in 3 years, he had something to wake up for every morning. Richard listened, really listened, and he realized something that hit him like a punch to the gut. Matthew didn't need more doctors. He didn't need more medication. He didn't need more money. He needed hope and someone who believed in him. And that person hadn't been Richard. It had been Evelyn. That afternoon, Richard went looking for Evelyn. He found her in the kitchen, cleaning. "Evelyn, I need to talk to you." Evelyn turned around. Her eyes were red. She had been crying. "Mr. Sterling, if you're going to fire me, I understand. I shouldn't have done anything without your permission. But please, let me finish the month with Matthew, just until I find someone who can continue." Richard shook his head. "I'm not going to fire you, Evelyn. I'm going to ask you a question. Why did you do it? Why did you dedicate 7 months to taking care of Matthew without anyone asking you to, without anyone paying you extra? Why?" Evelyn took a deep breath. Then she spoke, with a firm voice. "Because I used to be a physical therapist, Mr. Sterling. For 15 years, I worked at County General Hospital. I helped hundreds of patients with spinal cord injuries. I was good at my job, very good. But 5 years ago, I lost a patient, a young kid, 16 years old. Motorcycle accident, just like Matthew. I was in charge of his rehabilitation, but I got burned out. Burnout. I stopped paying attention. I stopped checking his exercises, and one day, during a session, he fell off the table, hit his head, went into a coma, died 2 weeks later. Evelyn wiped away her tears. "They took away my license. I got sued. I lost everything, my career, my reputation, my purpose. For 5 years, I've been working as a housekeeper, and every day, I wondered if I'd ever get another chance to make things right. When I came here, and I saw Matthew, I saw that kid. I saw my second chance, and I couldn't waste it. Not again." Richard felt a lump in his throat. Evelyn wasn't helping Matthew out of kindness. She was helping Matthew to save herself, to redeem herself, to prove that she could still do something good, and she had done it. Richard took a step towards her. "Evelyn, how much did the equipment you use with Matthew cost you?" Evelyn blinked. "Excuse me, the floats, the lift, everything. How much did it cost?" Evelyn lowered her gaze. $24,000, Mr. Sterling. I bought it with my savings. $24,000, 3 months of her salary, on equipment for Matthew, without anyone asking her to, without expecting anything in return. Richard pulled out his phone. He made a call. "Yes, this is Richard Sterling. I need you to connect me with the director of the Physical Therapists Association of California, now." Evelyn looked at him with wide eyes. "Mr. Sterling, what are you doing?" "I'm fixing a mistake," Richard said. During the next 3 weeks, Richard Sterling did something he had never done in his professional life. He used his power, but not to make money, not to close a deal, not to crush a competitor. He used it to help someone who owed him nothing. for someone who had given everything without asking for anything in return. He called the director of the Physical Therapists Association. He called lawyers. He called judges. He reviewed Evelyn's case line by line, the patient who had died, the burnout, the negligence, but he also found something else. He found that Evelyn had worked 14 shifts in a row before the accident, that she had asked for help and was denied, that the hospital was short-staffed, that the table where the boy fell had a manufacturing defect that the hospital knew about but hadn't repaired. Evelyn wasn't the only one to blame, but she had been the only one punished. Richard hired the best labor lawyers in California. He reopened the case, he presented new evidence, and after 18 hearings, 3 months of proceedings, and a letter signed by Richard where he personally guaranteed Evelyn's professional competence, the Physical Therapists Association of California issued a statement, professional license reinstated, with an official apology. When Richard gave Evelyn the news, she collapsed, literally. She fell to the kitchen floor and cried for 20 minutes. Richard sat next to her. He didn't say anything, he was just there. And when Evelyn could finally speak, she only said one thing. "Why did you do this for me?" Richard looked at her. "Because you did for Matthew what I couldn't, and because nobody should carry a mistake forever. Everyone deserves a second chance." Evelyn nodded, and Richard knew that something had changed. Not just in Evelyn, in him too. But the story doesn't end there, because what happened next is what really matters. Richard started waking up early, every morning, at 5:20. He was awake at 5:30. He was outside Matthew's room. And when Evelyn came out with the towel bag, Richard was there, waiting. "Can I join you?" he'd ask. Always. At first, Matthew didn't know how to react. He wasn't used to his uncle being present, but Evelyn taught Richard what to do, how to hold Matthew in the water, how to move him gently, how to talk to him to relax him, how to celebrate every millimeter of progress. And Richard learned. He learned that his nephew was stronger than he thought. He learned that the human body is capable of impossible things if someone believes in it. He learned that a millimeter of movement is worth more than $1 million in medication. But above all, he learned something that he had never been taught in his MBA, in his leadership courses, in his executive conferences. He learned to be present. A month after Evelyn got her license back, Richard made another decision. He reduced his working hours from 14 hours to 8. His board of directors opposed it. His partners complained. His investors questioned his commitment. Richard resigned as CEO. He appointed a successor and remained only as chairman of the board. 4 hours of work a day, the rest of the time at home with Matthew. Do you know what you would do in that situation? Would you give up your career for someone you love? Don't lie. Really think about it. Because Richard did. And it changed everything. With Evelyn now officially the family's physical therapist and Richard present at every session, Matthew's progress accelerated. It wasn't magic. It wasn't an instant miracle. It was work. Constant. Daily. Disciplined. 2 months after Richard started participating, the neurologist who evaluated Matthew every month arrived for his routine appointment. His name was Dr. Vargas, 58 years old, 30 years of experience in spinal cord injuries. He had seen it all. He entered Matthew's room with his tablet and his stethoscope. "Good morning, Matthew. We're going to do the usual evaluation." But when he started to check, he stopped. He frowned. He checked again. "Matthew, can you try to move your right hand for me?" Matthew closed his eyes, concentrated, and his hand moved 4 centimeters upward. Dr. Vargas took off his glasses, cleaned them, put them back on. He repeated the exercise. Matthew moved his hand again. 4 centimeters. The doctor turned towards Richard, who was standing in the corner of the room. "Mr. Sterling, what changed?" Richard glanced at Evelyn, who was by the window. "Evelyn," he simply said, And the pool. Dr. Vargas sat down. The pool. Matthew, are you doing hydrotherapy? Matthew nodded. Every day, for the past 8 months, with Evelyn. The doctor looked at Evelyn. Are you a physical therapist? Yes, doctor. Dr. Vargas pulled out his tablet. He started typing, then looked up. In 30 years of my career, I've seen 3 cases of C5, C6 spinal cord injuries that regained significant mobility in their hands. 3 out of hundreds, and all of them took years, not months. Matthew, in 8 months, you've regained more mobility than patients I've treated for 5 years. I don't know what you're doing, but keep doing it. Richard felt something in his chest. Pride, not for himself, for Evelyn, for Matthew, for what they had achieved together. Dr. Vargas closed his tablet and then said something Richard would never forget. Mr. Sterling, you pay me $50,000 for these monthly evaluations, and in 3 years, I haven't achieved even a fraction of the progress that this woman has achieved in 8 months. Do you know why? Richard shook his head. Because I see Matthew for 1 hour a month. She sees him for 2 hours a day. Because I prescribe exercises. She does them with him. Because I give him hope with words. She gives him hope with actions. Modern medicine is incredible, but it cannot replace what you have here. Dedication, consistency, love. The doctor left. Richard remained seated, looking at Matthew, looking at Evelyn, and he understood something fundamental. He had spent $50,000 a month for 3 years, $1.8 million, on doctors, on therapies, on medications. And Evelyn, with $3,000 a month salary and $3,000 of her own money and equipment, had achieved more because she wasn't there for the money. She was there for something that money cannot buy: redemption, purpose, love. That night, Richard asked Evelyn if he could see the equipment she had bought. Evelyn led him to the storage room where she kept the pool supplies. There they were, 3 professional medical flotation devices, bright yellow, with signs of use. Richard checked the labels, $1,000 each, $3,000 in total. Hospital-grade medical equipment, the same used in the best rehabilitation centers in Los Angeles. Evelyn bought them with her salary. 3 months of work, without anyone asking her to, without expecting to be repaid. Richard picked up one of the floats. It was heavy, well-made, professional. He turned it over, and then he saw something that hit him. On the back, with a permanent marker, Evelyn had written something for Matthew, because you deserve to fly. Day 1. Evelyn. Day 1. When Matthew still cried when he touched the water, when there was no guarantee it would work, when no one except Evelyn believed it was possible. That day, she had already invested everything she had, not in equipment, in faith. Richard felt his throat tighten. He put the float back in its place. He turned to Evelyn. Tomorrow, we're going to the medical equipment store, and we're going to buy everything you need. Everything. You're not spending your money on this anymore. Evelyn shook her head. It's not necessary, Mr. Sterling. I already have what I need, Richard insisted. It's not a suggestion, Evelyn. It's an order. And from now on, your salary won't be $3,000. It will be $12,000, as the professional physical therapist of this family. Evelyn's eyes widened. Sir, that's too much. No, Evelyn. Too little is what I've paid you until now for saving my nephew. Evelyn didn't know what to say. Richard neither. So they simply nodded and left the storage room, with a silent understanding between them. They were no longer employer and employee. They were a team, united by a single purpose: to give Matthew the life he deserved. The following weeks were different. Richard not only participated in the hydrotherapy sessions, he started studying. He read books about spinal cord injuries, about neuroplasticity, about aquatic rehabilitation. He took notes. He asked questions. Evelyn taught him everything she knew, and Matthew improved, slowly, very slowly, but steadily. Day 230. Matthew lifted his right hand 4 inches without assistance. Day 250. Matthew closed his right fist, just for 3 seconds, but he did it. Day 270. Matthew moved his left hand for the first time, half an inch, barely perceptible, but real. Each small advance was celebrated, not with shouts, not with exaggerations, but with something deeper, with recognition, with respect, with the certainty that Matthew's body was fighting, and it was winning. But not everything was physical progress. There was something more important happening. Matthew was becoming himself again, the guy who smiled, the guy who cracked jokes, the guy who had dreams. One day, during a session in the pool, Matthew said something to Richard that left him speechless. "Uncle, I want to go back to school." Richard almost fell into the water. "What?" Matthew nodded, floating with his yellow devices. "I dropped out of college after the accident, but I've been thinking, if I can move my hands, I can write. If I can write, I can study. I want to finish my degree." Richard felt warm tears on his cheeks. "What were you studying?" "Mechanical engineering. I wanted to design safer motorcycles. Ironic, right?" Richard shook his head. "It's not ironic, Matthew. It's perfect, and you're going to do it. I promise you're going to do it." Evelyn, who was holding Matthew in the water, smiled. "He already has the hands to write. He just needs time to strengthen them, and we're going to make it happen." And Richard knew in that moment that he had already passed the point of no return. He was no longer doing this out of guilt. He was no longer doing this out of obligation. He was doing it because he wanted to, because Matthew was his family, because seeing him smile was worth more than any business meeting, than any contract, than any number in a bank account. 3 months after Evelyn regained her license, Richard hosted a dinner. He invited Dr. Vargas, the nurses who had cared for Matthew for 3 years, the physical therapists who had worked with him, and of course Evelyn. In the middle of dinner, Richard stood up, he raised his glass and spoke. "I want to thank you all for being here. For 3 years you cared for Matthew. You gave him treatment, you gave him medication, you gave him your professional knowledge, and I am eternally grateful." He paused. "But there is someone here who gave him something more, something that no professional title, no medication, no treatment can give. She gave him faith. She gave him time. She gave him love. Evelyn Morales not only saved Matthew, she saved me too. He taught me that being present is worth more than being busy, that a minute of real attention is worth more than $1,000, that miracles don't come in bottles. They come in hands that are willing to work, no matter how much it hurts." Richard turned towards Evelyn, who was crying silently. "Evelyn, from now on, you are no longer just an employee of this house. You are part of this family, and always will be." Evelyn covered her face with her hands. Matthew, sitting in his wheelchair beside her, raised his right hand with effort and placed it on Evelyn's hand. She looked at him, and Matthew said something that silenced everyone at that table. "You're my angel, Evelyn, and someday I'm going to walk again, just to give you a standing hug." There wasn't a dry eye at that table. If this story has resonated with you this far, if you feel a lump in your throat, if your eyes are wet, it's because you recognize something. You recognize that the true heroes don't wear capes. They wear yellow rubber gloves, and they work in silence while the world sleeps. But what happened after that dinner is what really defines this story. Because until that moment, everything had been physical progress, hands that moved, fingers that closed, muscles that awakened. But there was something that Matthew still hadn't recovered, something deeper than any physical movement, his soul. 3 years of guilt, 3 years of thinking he had killed his mom, 3 years of believing his life had ended in that accident. That can't be cured with hydrotherapy. That can't be cured with medicine. That can only be cured with something Evelyn had been giving him all this time without anyone noticing. Forgiveness. A month after the dinner, during a morning session in the pool, something happened that no one expected. Richard and Evelyn were in the water with Matthew. As always, routine exercises, gentle movements. The morning light streamed through the windows. Everything was normal, until Matthew started to cry. Not silent tears. It was a deep cry, heart-wrenching, the kind of cry that comes from a place where words can't reach. Evelyn and Richard stopped immediately. "Matthew, what's wrong? Does something hurt?" Matthew shook his head. He kept crying, trembling in the water. "It was Mom, my fault," he said, sobbing. "I killed her. I made her get on that bike. She didn't want to. She told me to go slow, and I sped up. I killed her." Richard felt the world stop. In 3 years, Matthew had never spoken about the accident. Never. The psychologists had tried. The nurses had asked. No one had managed to get him to talk. But there, in that pool, at 6 in the morning, surrounded by water and love, he finally broke. Evelyn held him tighter. "No, Matthew, you didn't kill anyone. It was an accident, a terrible accident, but it wasn't your fault." "Yes, it was," Matthew shouted. "I was driving. I was going fast. I didn't see the truck. It was all my fault." Richard felt tears running down his face. He approached Matthew, looked him in the eyes. "Matthew, if anyone is to blame here, it's me. I gave you that bike. I put the keys in your hands. I told you to go enjoy it. If you want to blame someone, blame me." "No, Uncle. No, you just wanted to make me happy. And you just wanted to live. That's not a crime, Matthew. That's being young. That's being human. But she died because of me." Evelyn spoke then, in a firm voice. "Matthew, look at me." Matthew looked up. Evelyn held him with one hand, and with the other she touched his chest. "Your mom died. That's true, and it hurts, and it's always going to hurt. But you didn't kill her. Fate took her, and let you stay. Do you know why?" Matthew shook his head, crying. "Because your story wasn't over. Because you still have things to do in this world. Because your mom wouldn't want to see you like this, destroying yourself over something you couldn't control. She'd want to see you smiling, living, fighting, like you're doing now. But I can't walk. I can't run. I can't be who I was. No, but you can be someone better, someone stronger, someone who knows what it's like to fall and get up, someone who can help others who are where you were. Your mom gave you life twice. Once when you were born, and again when she left. Don't waste that gift blaming yourself." Matthew cried harder, Richard too, and Evelyn held them both in that pool. 3 broken people. 3 people who had lost something. 3 people who were finding themselves in the water. After 10 minutes, Matthew took a deep breath. He wiped his tears with the hand he could move, and said something that changed everything. "I want to live, really live, not just exist. I want to live." Richard hugged him. For the first time in 3 years, he hugged Matthew for real. Not with pity, not with guilt, with love. And Matthew hugged him back, weak, trembling, but real. That was the real miracle. Not the hands that moved, not the fingers that closed, but the heart that was beating again with purpose. From that day on, something changed in Matthew. He no longer just participated. In the hydrotherapy sessions, he led them. He told Evelyn what exercises he wanted to try. He asked Richard to hold him in a certain way so he could try a new movement. He took control of his own recovery, and the results were astonishing. 4 months after that cry in the pool, exactly 1 year after Evelyn had started working with him, Matthew did something impossible. During a session, while Evelyn and Richard were holding him in the water, he said, "I want to try something. Let me go." Evelyn and Richard looked at each other. "Are you sure?" Matthew nodded. "I trust you. If I sink, pull me out. But I want to try floating alone." Evelyn and Richard exchanged a glance. Then, slowly, very slowly, they let go of Matthew. The yellow floaties on his arms and torso kept him on the surface. but without hands holding him, he started to tilt to one side. Matthew moved his right arm, 2 inches, then 5, then 10. He adjusted his balance and stayed afloat, alone, without help. Evelyn, who covered her mouth with her hands. Richard let out a shout of joy, and Matthew smiled, the biggest smile they had ever seen. "I'm flying," he said. "Mom, I'm flying." He floated alone for 30 seconds. Then he started to get tired, and Evelyn held him again. But those 30 seconds were enough. They were proof that the human body, when it has a reason to fight, can achieve the impossible. That night, Richard couldn't sleep. He stayed awake thinking about everything that had happened. About how, a year ago, he had heard impossible laughter coming from the pool. About how he had discovered Evelyn. About how he had learned that love is worth more than money. About how Matthew had gone from not smiling in 3 years to floating alone in the water. And he realized something. This story wasn't about Matthew. It wasn't about Evelyn. It was about him. It was about a man who had once possessed everything, and yet had nothing. A man who worked 14-hour days, just to avoid feeling. A man who had lost his sister and almost lost his nephew because he was too busy making money to see what really mattered. But Evelyn had taught him something. She had taught him that being present is the most valuable gift you can give. That 2 hours in a swimming pool are worth more than $2 million in the bank. That miracles can't be bought. They're built with hands, with time, with love. 2 weeks after the day Matthew floated on his own, Richard asked Evelyn to accompany him to a meeting. He didn't tell her what it was about. He simply asked her to come. Evelyn, confused, agreed. They arrived at a medical building in Beverly Hills. They went up to the 6th floor and entered an office with a view of the city. And there was Dr. Vargas and 4 other doctors Evelyn didn't recognize. "Mr. Sterling," Dr. Vargas said, "you're right on time. These are the best neurologists and physical therapists in California. I invited them to hear what I have to say." Richard nodded. Evelyn was completely lost. What was going on? Dr. Vargas stood up. "Evelyn, a year ago, Matthew Sterling's case was hopeless. C5, C6 spinal cord injury, incomplete quadriplegia. 3 years with no significant progress. The best doctors in Los Angeles had treated him, and nothing had worked. Then you arrived. And in 1 year, Matthew regained mobility in both hands. He can make a fist. He can write. He can adjust his balance in the water. 2 weeks ago, he floated alone for 30 seconds. That, medically speaking, is a miracle." The doctor paused. "I've documented his case. I presented it at the International Congress of Neurology in Houston, and the results were clear. Your method of intensive hydrotherapy, combined with constant emotional support, surpasses any traditional treatment we've tried. That's why we're here today, to ask you something." Evelyn blinked. "Ask me what?" "We want you to train other physical therapists. We want your method to be taught in hospitals. We want what you did for Matthew to be replicated for hundreds of patients with spinal cord injuries. Mr. Sterling has already agreed to fund a pilot program. 50 patients, 6 months, daily hydrotherapy. You would be the director." Evelyn was speechless. Richard smiled. "Evelyn, this isn't a question, it's a need. What you did for Matthew can't stay with him alone. Others deserve the same opportunity, and you're the only one who knows how to give it." Evelyn felt tears running down her cheeks. "But Matthew, I can't leave him." "You're not going to leave him. You'll continue working with him every morning, but the afternoons will be for others, for people who need what you gave Matthew. Hope." Evelyn looked at the doctors, then at Richard, then at Dr. Vargas, and finally said, "Do you really think I can do this?" Dr. Vargas approached her. "Evelyn, in 30 years of my career, I've seen many good physical therapists, but I've only seen 3 exceptional ones, and you are one of them, not just because of your technique, but because of something that can't be taught in any university. You love your patients, and they feel it. That's what makes the difference. Evelyn nodded. Then I'll do it. I'll do it for Matthew, and for all the Matthews who are waiting for their own miracle. The doctors applauded. Richard hugged her, and Evelyn, for the first time in 5 years, felt that her life had meaning again. She had lost her license, she had lost her career, she had lost her purpose, but she had found it all again, in a swimming pool, at 5:30 in the morning, with a boy who couldn't move his hands, but who taught her to move her heart. 6 months later, the pilot program began. 50 patients with spinal cord injuries from all over Los Angeles, some with more severe cases than Matthew, others with milder cases, but all with something in common. They had lost hope. Evelyn trained 20 physical therapists. She taught them her method, but above all, she taught them something more important. She taught them to see their patients as people, not as cases, not as numbers, as human beings who deserved dignity, respect, love. The program was a resounding success. In 6 months, 42 of the 50 patients showed significant improvement. 15 regained mobility in their hands. 8 were able to write again. 3 were able to return to work. And all of them, absolutely all of them, smiled again. The media found out. Newspapers, television, medical journals. Everyone wanted to know about the woman who had achieved the impossible, the housekeeper who became the best physical therapist in California, the woman who gave back hope with water and love. But Evelyn didn't want fame. She didn't want recognition. She just wanted to keep doing what she loved. So she declined interviews. She declined awards. And she kept getting up at 5 in the morning to be in the pool with Matthew, because that was her priority. It always had been. It always would be. If you didn't feel chills reading this, if you don't have tears in your eyes right now, then you didn't understand anything, because this story isn't about medicine. It's about humanity. It's about what happens when someone decides that a life is worth more than a salary, that a miracle is worth more than a dream. And Matthew kept improving, day after day, week after week. He was no longer the exception. He was the rule. Because when you have someone who believes in you more than you believe in yourself, your body does things that science can't explain. A year and a half after Evelyn started working with Matthew, he did something that the doctors had said was impossible. During a session in the pool, with Evelyn and Richard by his side, Matthew closed both fists at the same time, and he kept them closed for a full 10 seconds. Then he opened them, and with his right hand, slowly, very slowly, he raised his thumb, as if saying, "We're okay, we're going to be okay." Evelyn and Richard cried again, but this time they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of victory, of gratitude, of love. And when they got out of the water that day, Matthew asked Richard for something. "Uncle Richard, can you get me a laptop?" Richard blinked. "What for?" "I want to write. I want to tell my story. I want others who are where I was to know that there's hope, that miracles exist, and that they come from the most unexpected hands." Richard bought him the best laptop on the market, and Matthew began to write, with his hands that could barely move, with fingers that trembled, with a body that the doctors had given up on. He wrote and wrote and wrote. His first sentence, written completely alone, without anyone's help, was this: "My name is Matthew Sterling. 3 years ago, I stopped believing in miracles. Today, I know they exist, and they wear yellow gloves." When Richard read that sentence on the screen, he sank to his knees beside Matthew's wheelchair and wept as he hadn't wept since the day of the accident. Not from sadness, from pride, from love, from the absolute certainty that his nephew was going to be all right, that he was going to live, that he was going to be happy. And Evelyn, who was in the kitchen preparing breakfast, heard the sound of his weeping. She rushed in. She saw Richard kneeling. She saw Matthew with tears streaming onto the keyboard. She saw the sentence on the screen, and she knew Her work was done, not finished. It would never be finished, but she had achieved what she set out to do. She had given Matthew his life back. She had taught Richard how to truly love, and she had redeemed herself. That night before sleeping, Evelyn took out her old notebook, the one with the 200 days documented. She opened the last page and wrote a final entry, Day 5, 147. Matthew wrote his first sentence alone. Richard cried with happiness. I cried too, not because the work is finished, but because I finally understood something. I didn't save Matthew. He saved me. He gave me back my purpose, my reason for living, my faith that second chances exist. Thank you, Matthew. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, life, for letting me be a part of this miracle. She closed the notebook, put it back in her drawer, and slept in peace for the first time in 5 years, because she knew she had done something that mattered, something that would last, something that would change lives. And she was right. 2 years after Evelyn came to Richard Sterling's house, everyone involved's life was completely different. Matthew returned to UCLA. It wasn't easy. He had to take adapted classes. He needed special equipment to write. It took him twice as long as other students to complete his assignments. But he did it. He reintegrated into mechanical engineering, and his thesis project was on the design of aquatic rehabilitation equipment for patients with spinal cord injuries, based on his own experience, on what Evelyn had taught him. His professor gave him an honors grade and nominated him for the National Medical Innovation Award. Matthew didn't win, but just being nominated was enough, because it meant that his story mattered, that his pain hadn't been in vain, that he could help others. And best of all, Matthew recovered 30% mobility in his arms. It wasn't much to some, but for someone the doctors had declared hopeless, it was a universe. He could write, he could eat alone, he could hug himself, and that, to Matthew, was freedom. Evelyn became the director of the Sterling Hydrotherapy Center, an entire building dedicated to aquatic rehabilitation for patients with spinal cord injuries, fully funded by Richard, with 5 therapeutic pools, 20 physical therapists trained personally by Evelyn, and the capacity to treat 200 patients a month. But every morning, no matter how many patients were waiting, no matter how many meetings she had scheduled, Evelyn still arrived at Richard's house at 5:30 and still worked with Matthew in the pool for 2 hours, every day, without fail, because that was her commitment. Matthew first, always. And Richard was no longer the man who worked 14 hours a day to avoid feeling. He reduced his workday to 6 hours. The rest of the time he dedicated to the foundation, and to Matthew, and to living, for real. He learned to swim at 53 years old, because he wanted to be in the water with Matthew. He wanted to understand what his nephew felt when he floated, and when he finally did, when he finally let himself float in that pool he had ignored for years, he understood. He understood why Matthew said the water made him feel free, because in the water, the weight disappears, the limitations disappear, only the body remains, and the soul, and the possibility. This story shouldn't exist, because in a normal world, Evelyn would never have gotten that job. In a normal world, Richard would never have heard those laughs. In a normal world, Matthew would still be in that chair, hopeless, waiting to die. But this is not a normal world. This is a world where miracles happen. And they happen because someone decided it was worth trying. Evelyn's program grew. In 2 years, she attended to more than 2,000 patients. 800 showed significant improvement. 300 recovered functional mobility. 100 went back to work. And all, absolutely all, recovered something that medicine can't prescribe: hope. One of those patients was a 12-year-old girl named Ashley. Severe cerebral palsy. She couldn't move anything except her eyes. The doctors said she would never improve, that her case was too severe. But her parents heard about Evelyn. about the woman who performed miracles in the water, and they brought her to the center. Evelyn worked with Ashley for 6 months, every day, with the same dedication she had given to Matthew, and after 180 days, Ashley moved her pinky finger, 2 millimeters, barely visible, but real. Her parents cried, Evelyn cried, and Ashley, who hadn't smiled in 12 years, smiled. That day, Evelyn understood something. She wasn't doing this just for Matthew. She wasn't doing this just for redemption. She was doing this because it was her purpose, her reason for existing, her way of leaving something good in the world. One day during a medical conference in Los Angeles, Evelyn was asked to give a speech. She didn't want to. She hated public speaking, but Richard convinced her. You have to tell your story, Evelyn. People need to hear it. So Evelyn took the stage, in front of 500 doctors, physical therapists, and specialists, and she spoke with a shaky voice at first, but getting firmer and firmer. She told them about the boy she lost, the one who died because of her negligence. She told them about how she lost everything: license, career, purpose. She told them about how she arrived at Richard's house as a housekeeper, without hope, without a future, just trying to survive. And then she told them about Matthew, about how she saw him in that wheelchair and saw the boy she couldn't save, about how she decided that this time would be different, that this time she wouldn't fail, that this time she would give everything, no matter the cost. She told them about the 200 days documented, about the 5:30 mornings, about the $24,000 of her own money, about the tears, about the small victories, about the day Matthew smiled for the first time, about the day he floated alone, about the day he wrote his first sentence, and when she finished, when she said her last word, there was silence, absolute, for 10 full seconds, and then 500 health professionals stood up and applauded for 5 full minutes. Some cried and others smiled, but everyone understood. They understood that medicine is important, that science is fundamental, but that without love, without dedication, without that inexplicable something that makes someone get up at 5 in the morning to care for a stranger, none of that matters. After the speech, a young physical therapist approached Evelyn. Her eyes were red. She'd been crying. Miss Morales, she said, I quit my job 3 months ago. Burnout. Just like you. I thought I could never go back. But after listening to you, I know I can. I know I must. Thank you. Evelyn embraced her and told her something she would never forget. Burnout doesn't mean you're weak. It means you loved so much you emptied yourself. But love regenerates. If you let it, if you give yourself permission to try again, there are patients waiting for you, and you're the only one who can help them. Don't waste that gift. The young woman nodded, and 3 months later, Evelyn received an email from her. She had returned to work and had saved her first post-burnout patient, a child with paralysis who could now move his hands thanks to her. And Evelyn knew that her story was doing what Matthew had wanted. It was giving hope. It was inspiring. It was changing lives. 3 years after the day Richard heard those impossible laughs coming from the pool, he organized a gathering. He invited Evelyn, Matthew, Dr. Vargas, all 50 patients from the pilot program, the physical therapists Evelyn had trained, the families of the patients, everyone who had been touched by this story. He rented a huge hall with a capacity for 500 people, and when everyone was there, when everyone was seated, Richard took the stage and spoke. 3 years ago, he said, I was a wealthy man. I had a company valued at $300 million. I had a 4-story house in Bel Air. I had everything that money can buy, but I had none of what really matters. I had no time. I had no presence. I had no love. My nephew was dying in life in my own house, and I was too busy making money to notice. He paused. Until one morning, I heard something impossible, laughter, coming from the pool I never used. And when I went to see, I discovered that the woman I thought was just my housekeeper was actually an angel who had been getting up at 5:30 in the morning for months to save my nephew, without anyone asking her, without expecting anything in return. Richard pointed to Evelyn, pointed to, "That woman taught me something that no business book, no leadership course, no corporate consultant had ever taught me. She taught me that being present is worth more than being busy, that a minute of real attention is worth more than $1 million, that miracles don't come in bottles, they come from hands that are willing to work, no matter how much it hurts." He turned towards Matthew, who was sitting in the front row. "And thanks to her, my nephew is here, smiling, studying, living, not just surviving, living, and that is priceless." He paused again. "That's why today, I want to announce something. I have decided to donate 50% of my personal fortune to expand the Sterling Hydrotherapy Center. We are going to open 10 more centers in 10 cities across the United States, so that what Evelyn did for Matthew can be replicated for thousands of patients, so that no family has to lose hope, so that miracles are accessible, not just to the wealthy, but to everyone." The hall erupted in applause. Evelyn covered her face with her hands. Matthew was crying. Dr. Vargas was smiling, and Richard felt something he hadn't felt in decades: peace. After the event, when everyone had left, only Richard, Evelyn, and Matthew remained. The three of them sat by the pool of the Bel Air home, the same pool where it had all begun, where the miracles had been born. Matthew looked at the water. Then he looked at Evelyn, then at Richard, and said, "You know what's the craziest thing about all this?" "What?" asked Richard. "That I thought I had lost everything in that accident. My body, my future, my life. But in reality, it was when I found everything. I found purpose. I found love. I found family. If I could go back, if I could change what happened, I wouldn't. Because this that we have now, you two, this struggle, this victory, is worth more than walking." Evelyn cried, Richard cried, and Matthew smiled. That smile that Richard hadn't seen in 3 years, that smile that he now saw every day. Evelyn spoke then, "I wouldn't change anything either. I lost a patient. I lost my license. I lost 5 years of my life cleaning houses. But all of that brought me here, to you, to this, and it was the best mistake I could have made." Richard looked at them both and knew that this was his family, not of blood, but of something stronger, of shared survival, of love built in adversity, of miracles made with human hands. You have 2 options now. You can close this page, forget you read this, go back to your life as if nothing has changed. Or you can remember that small gestures save lives, that being present is worth more than anything, that there is someone in your life who needs you to be their Evelyn, their Richard, their miracle. What story from your life have you never told? What small gesture changed a life and you never knew? 5 years after that first day, Evelyn entered the water with Matthew. The network of hydrotherapy centers had grown to 25 locations. 5,000 patients served, 2,000 with significant improvement, 500 returned to work, 100 graduated from college, and everyone, absolutely everyone, smiled again. Matthew graduated from mechanical engineering with honors and got a job at a company that designs medical equipment. His first project was an improved flotation system, based on the yellow floaties that Evelyn had bought with her own savings, floaties that were now sold throughout the United States. And that carried a small plaque that read, "Designed by Matthew Sterling, in honor of Evelyn Morales." Because we all deserve to fly. Evelyn continued to work. At 47 years old, she was considered the best aquatic rehabilitation physical therapist in America. She received awards, recognition, invitations to international conferences, But none of that mattered as much as 5:30 in the morning, when she continued to arrive at Richard's house and continued to work with Matthew, because that was her commitment. And commitments are not broken. And Richard was no longer a CEO. He no longer worked 14 hours. He no longer chased figures on screens. Now he spent his days swimming, visiting hydrotherapy centers, talking with families, hugging patients, living for real, for the first time in his life. One day, a journalist asked him, "Do you regret stepping down as CEO, giving away half your fortune?" Richard smiled. "The only thing I regret is not hearing those laughs sooner, not looking out that window 3 years earlier than I did. Because every day Matthew spent without hope was a day I stole, with my absence, with my cowardice, with my refusal to see what was right in front of me." He paused. "But Evelyn gave me a second chance. Matthew gave me a second chance. Life gave me a second chance. And I'm not going to waste it, chasing things that don't matter." The journalist wrote the article. It went viral. 3 million views in the first week. And in the comments, hundreds of people shared their own stories. About housekeepers who raised them, about caregivers who saved them, about invisible angels who worked in silence while the world slept. One person wrote, "My grandmother was a housekeeper her entire life. She raised other people's children while her own were alone. I never thanked her. She passed away 2 years ago. After reading this, I went to her graveside and I apologized. And I thanked her for the first time. Thank you for telling this story." Another wrote, "I'm a doctor. I work in a public hospital. I'm burned out, tired, hopeless. I was going to quit tomorrow. But after reading this, I'm going back. I'm going to try one more time. Because if Evelyn could get up at 5:30 in the morning for 200 days straight, I can handle one more shift, one more patient, one more miracle." And Evelyn, reading those comments on her phone, wept, not from sadness, from gratitude, because her story was doing exactly what it was supposed to do. It was giving hope. 10 years after that first day at the pool, Evelyn, Richard, and Matthew were still together, no longer as housekeeper, boss, and patient, but as family. The family they had built in the water, with tears, with effort, with love. And every morning at 5:30, no matter if it was raining, if it was cold, if they were tired, the three of them met at that pool, the pool that Richard had never used, the pool that had become the most sacred place in that house, the place where miracles were born, and they floated together in the water. 3 broken people who had found each other and had repaired each other, not with money, not with medicine, but with something more powerful. Presence, dedication, love. This story is real. The names were changed. The details were adjusted, but the essence is true. Because somewhere in this world, right now, there's an Evelyn getting up at 5 in the morning to care for someone the world forgot. There's a Richard listening to impossible laughter and discovering that what he was looking for was always in his own home. There's a Matthew recovering not his body, but his soul, and smiling for the first time in years. If this story reached you, it wasn't an accident. It was because you needed to hear it. Because there's someone in your life who is doing the impossible for you, and you haven't noticed, or because you are that person, doing miracles in silence, without anyone seeing you, without anyone thanking you, but doing it anyway, because you know it matters. Miracles don't come from heaven. They come from human hands. They come from ordinary people who decide to do extraordinary things. They come from someone who gets up when everyone else is sleeping, who gives when they have nothing left, who believes when everyone has stopped believing. They come from people like Evelyn, like you, like we all could be, if we just decided that it's worth trying. Because in the end, when it's all over, when your last day comes, you're not going to ask yourself, how much money you made. You're not going to ask yourself how many hours you worked. You're going to ask yourself, who did I love? Who did I help? What small miracle did I leave in this world? And if your answer is nothing, you still have time. There's still someone waiting. There's still a pool in your life that you've never used. There are still impossible laughs that you can hear if you just decide to pay attention. Evelyn Morales didn't save Matthew. Matthew saved Evelyn. Richard didn't give them a second chance. They gave it to him, and they all saved each other. Because that's what love does. It doesn't save one. It saves everyone. That's the story. That's the truth. That's the lesson. And if you carry it with you, if you keep it in your heart, if you let it change how you see the world, then this story has fulfilled its purpose. Because the small miracles, the ones that nobody sees, the ones that happen at 5:30 in the morning in an empty pool, those are the ones that really change the world. One life at a time, one day at a time, one miracle at a time, until we all smile again.